Radley and then Mark about a minute or so to address anything that they want to choose.
Yeah, just a few quick comments. So I'm sure Mark and I would disagree about what sorts of situations are appropriate for tactical units, and my definition or my range of situations would probably be much narrower. But to the extent that we do have SWAT teams, I would like to emphasize, and I pointed this out in the book, that I do think there are legitimate reasons for using these sorts of tactics, and that's when you have these, an immediate threat to lives, when you have these emergency type situations. I think the chief objection is when you have, the appropriate use is when you're using violence to diffuse already violent situations. The objection is when you're creating violence and confrontation where there was none before, which is what is what I would argue is happening on these drug raids. But again, I would like to emphasize I do think there are legitimate reasons for SWAT teams, and so to the extent that we're going to have them, I do think NTOA provides a valuable service in that they establish best practices, they establish guidelines. If we are going to have these units, we want them to be as well trained and professional as possible. That said, this obviously the Black Panthers were very well armed, but this sort of gets to my point, though. Also, is that I would not object to the use of those tactics in that raid. That is a perfectly appropriate use for a SWAT team. You know, this violent group that depending on whose story you believe, a police officer went to respond to a noise complaint and had a bunch of guns pointed at him, or if there are other scenarios, there are competing narratives about what happened. But I would not consider this an inappropriate use of a SWAT team at all. And so, the fact that they were this well armed, I think, was a legitimate use for this kind of force. That's about all I have, actually.
In reading Mr. Balko's book, my head went a lot more of this than this. I agree.
Can I quote you on that? I put that on the paper bag.
The head father. But we have had discussions in the past, and we agree. We agree more than disagree. And the use of SWAT or tactical teams, I like to refer, should be limited. And that's what we advocate, that it should not be used every day. It should be used as a last resort for certain situations. So in that regard, we agree.
You're killing my street cred here.
Does anyone have questions for either of our panelists? Yes, sir.
Well, I mean, I think some of these things have been covered a little vaguely. How dangerous is police work? It settles around 10, 11, 12 in the most dangerous, maybe even 15 some years. But the fact is, half of that is a result of traffic accidents. And if we take any rough sampling of videos that we can see of police actually in action, that number that is actually killed in action could be reduced considerably if something was done about excessive, abrasive, confrontational behavior on the part of police. Almost every video shown shows some kind of improper action, usually a great deal of improper action. Now, if you go even beyond that into a bunch of other details that are hard to cover right now, the fact is the police need to be prosecuted when they overstep the law. They need to go to prison when they do lots of these things that we see examples of constantly, and they're usually just let off the hook. Now, there are exceptions, but the exceptions are rare. If police aren't prosecuted when they overstep their rights, we basically live in a society, a tiered society of different people having different kinds of rights, just like a feudal system. And we're already effectively there as far as the FBI, what the rights they have compared to individuals, and lots of bureaucrats and just various other legislation. Police need to be prosecuted, and it's that simple.
Well, I think this is a common frustration. I mean, I think that the number of rogue police officers is very small as a percentage of overall police officers. I think the frustration comes in is when those rogue officers aren't held accountable, and that suggests a more systemic problem. And the other, I think, sort of related issue that I found with these raids is, when you have one of these raids where an innocent person gets killed, the reaction from the police department and usually the prosecutors is inevitably that the police officers were following procedures, so there was no, they weren't out of line with procedure, there's no criminal violation, and also there's nothing wrong with the procedures, and we're not going to change the procedures. And so, if an innocent person dies, and through no wrongdoing of the officers, because they were following procedure, and there's nothing wrong with the procedures, the inevitable conclusion is it's perfectly acceptable to have innocent people die during these drug raids. I mean, there's no other way to look at it, right? Either something went wrong, or this is an expected outcome, or a tolerable outcome. I think that is the frustration, that when things do go wrong, and I imagine the vast majority of these raids are conducted very professionally, and innocent people don't die, right? But when things do go wrong, there doesn't appear to be any significant accountability, and I think that's where people think there's a more systemic problem.
Well, your first statement about officer dying in line of duty from car accidents or being involved in traffic accidents more than being killed in the line
I
of
said
duty.
half, I didn't say more.
More or half, but that is a very, very big issue because that vehicle is a weapon, whether they're being used to hurt others or hurt themselves. So,
By who, the police or by the people?
by the police. So that is a true statement. Getting back to accountability, when I retired, I was in charge of the State Police Academy, Pittsburgh State Police Academy. And one of my speeches I give to every academy class that I hold to my standards and that I hold to all the academy classes that went through the academy when I was there, is that effective tomorrow, when you graduate, you are held at a higher standard than anybody else, 24/7, 7 days a week, include your family. And you're going to be watched. And anything you do because somebody else can do it, you cannot get away with it. When it comes to police department or prosecutors not prosecuting misconduct, then that's the issue that you and your community should take up. Because the district attorney or the attorney general are publicly elected officials. And those are the issues that you should take up with those.
Well, as I said, any sampling of videos taken of the police, any sampling, shows an overwhelming majority of them engaged in abrasive, confrontational, or excessive behavior in their dealings with people when they...
I appreciate the comment, and we'll stick around afterwards, but I would like to get some other questions. Yes, ma'am.
Quick question. Is there a registry where every time a SWAT team is deployed, is it mandatory that they basically give a description, maybe not confidentiality, so we kind of have an idea of why they're being deployed, like the statistics and around the country, every time the SWAT team was deployed? Is it registered?
No.
No.
And in Maryland it is. Maryland's the only state that requires that now.
You talk about the criminal side of it, and I guess the intent is part of that, and you talk about the rules, whether they follow procedures, if they break the rules or someone dies. What about reform into opening towards getting away from, maybe talk about negligence on the side of police officers, or their commanders, or leadership who develop the procedures to follow?
This is not going to be a popular opinion with police officers, but I do think that qualified immunity does kind of put officers in a state of mind that they are sort of above the law where it can. I do understand the argument that police officers need some sort of extra protection so they're not sort of hesitating before using force when it is necessary. But qualified immunity basically rules out negligence, and so you have to prove basically malicious intent before you can even get into a courtroom. So, and the police officers actually